Thank you for joining us for the 7th season of Inside the Dancer's Studio, where we bring listeners like you closer to the creative process. Celebrating a decade of rigorous play and positive failure, NCCAkron is an incubator and hub for dance research and development and serves as a connector, a catalyst, and a cultural matchmaker. Inside the Dancer's Studio is recorded as an ongoing documentation practice with NCCAkron visiting artists. This episode, NCCAkron's Executive Artistic Director, Christy Bolingbroke, enters the studio with San Francisco, California-based dance artist Yayoi Kambara, director of Kambara Plus. Kambara Plus cultivates belonging through multidisciplinary performances that honor the authentic voice of the body.
I am thrilled to welcome a longtime friend and colleague as a research residency artist this week. So let's get on with the show. Here today, Yayoi Kambara. Hey, Yayoi.
Hey, Christy.
Yay, coast to coast. Now we get to hang out.
Oh, that's right. Thank you so much for having me in Akron.
I'm so glad we reconnected. And I know you've been exploring and having a lot of fun this week. This particular podcast being an opportunity for our friends and colleagues, aspiring dancers and artists in higher ed. We like to focus on what it is to navigate a creative career. And you have had a wild and varied creative career, always with dance as a major practice. But I'd like to start and ask you, when did you first sort of own or call yourself a choreographer?
Wow, I'm not sure if I feel comfortable with it yet. I mean, I do. You know, I love the time we have in the studio. Mm-hmm. And I love being with other artistic and creative people. But a lot of what I did as a professional dancer was, I would say, devised choreography.
Absolutely.
And so when it's so devised, who's the choreographer? I mean, I'm not sure there's a single one. I think on paper, I end up being a choreographer. And no matter how many creative ways I try to cite all of our collaborators and dancers, and it's just really hard to do it right. So I think that's something I'm still trying to figure out. It's kind of like, I learned a new word this quarter. It's called palimpsest.
Oh, how do you say that again?
Palimpsest. It's like PALIMPSET.
Okay. And what does that mean?
It's like being able to see if you have a piece of paper and multiple things, inks on top of it, being able to see the traces of the previous words. And so that's kind of how I feel like my choreographic practice is. Is sure, I'm somewhere in there, and sometimes I'm brighter and sometimes I'm less bright. But yeah, something in that range.
If listeners are getting to hear or meet you and your work for the first time, I can offer a little background. We first met when we both worked for ODC in San Francisco, and I was responsible for theater, performance programming, marketing, and development, and you were on stage as one of the full-time dancers. And as I heard you processing the question, I was like, oh, right. Like, even with the longevity that ODC has in the field, it really was a bridge organization creatively. If you think about 20th century dance making, a lot of it is single choreographers. It's codified techniques, and the choreographer's name is on top of it. And ODC, which originally began as the Oberlin Dance Collective, also here in Ohio, has had that multi-voice pluralistic approach. Then during your time and tenure there, I got to witness how Brenda, or a choreographer, Brenda Way, would be at the front of the room, offer a prompt, and how each of you as performers and dancers and collaborators would then sort of do your own call and response and improvise. And I love how you phrased it, devised. That, I think, also speaks to then how some 21st century choreographers, maybe they only got started in the last 2 decades, regularly credit on paper choreographed in collaboration with the dancers.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying on this new word again, palimpsest.
Yeah.
As another way to think about choreography. So whoever and wherever you show up in spaces, though, you do bring the choreographic mind. And that's what I got to witness this week because you jammed with some of our local artists.
That was so fun.
Oh my gosh. Well,
it's been fun.
Describe it in your terms, what that experience has been with the Avamancy project crew.
Okay. So I got to meet Avamancy once before I came to Akron on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, kind of a brief casual talk about our projects and where they might intersect. And I understood that they were interested in birds and the bird decline, population decline. And I understood that Monica was a really serious naturalist and nature. She works in nature conservation.
Monica Bowman.
Yes, for Park Services. And Chris Coles is a jazz musician, composer, improviser. So I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. But you don't get a sense of people, I think, until you're in the room with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first day I was like, okay, we're going to meet them and then it's going to feel interesting. And they brought their colleague Pat, who's a percussionist.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things that we discovered was Pat's a pretty seriously training dancer. So, went to performing arts high school, studied Horton technique. And so I realized, oh yeah, he really understands us as movers,
Mm-hmm.
And then Monica, we were like, well, what if we played with Monica through movement? And Monica's like super game.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was another kind of comfortable contact, even though we weren't touching each other moment there. I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. And then we started talking more about their project with omens, how birds have omens, so, and I was like, oh yeah, like people used to tell me if you see a hummingbird, that's one of your ancestors visiting you.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you see crows or vultures circling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something's dead and something's going to get eaten. And also my story was I was on a beach once and all of a sudden the sky got really quiet and all the seagulls disappeared.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
And the storm came.
They knew. There's that innateness or an intuitiveness. And, it should go to say that, we often think a little bit ecologically here, maybe bird nature pun intended, because we also think about playing matchmaker when artists are coming to town, whether it's with a head baker somewhere or with a naturalist. And it's not to do forced collaboration, but the original prompt had been, hey, what if y'all had a jam session and had some quality time in the studio? And I hear you when you say, like, you don't really know someone until you can be in space with them, whether it's a rehearsal or not. There is that sense of reading people's body language and and their presence in the space too. And that could have been it. That could have been enough. But I love that y'all have hung out often since then.
Oh, I know. It's been pretty cool, and so, and then I was talking to them about like what I'm interested in, and I've been wanting to do this piece for a really long time, and it has to do with migration, and it has to do with what I call like modernity, the suburb, something about, and it's not really obviously about the suburb. It's not about cities. It's just about our mechanizations as human beings and our routines and how we've stopped paying attention to nature. Also, it stems from having this experience where I filmed Out of the Dust, which is a film about Japanese American incarceration during the pandemic. And we were in outside of the Eastern Sierras in Manzanar. And we were staying in Bishop, the town next to it. And it's like hunters and hikers and stuff. And often in places like this, I am the only person of color, even though in California we have quite a few Asian American people. And so there's something about being in nature that sometimes feels like, oh, it's not meant for me or somehow. And so I have this real interest. I love nature. I love being in nature. I love seeing animals in nature. And so it makes me really think about, what's that migration pattern like? And we are all settlers except for indigenous people. So there's that portion of it. And then there's these exotic species of birds and insects and populations. And so I felt like my research and interests in those kind of topics tied with avomancy. And there's something about patterns and maps and how they're actually getting people's and maybe not people's, but animal migrations are actually getting much shorter. So as the temperatures increase, right, birds are not flying as far south and north. They don't have to travel distance. And so their movement patterns are actually getting smaller and more mechanized or shorter or something. And so I'm really thinking about those things. And so, yeah.
I mean, it as you describe how you think about things, your viewpoint of the world is choreographic. I often like to say everything is choreography, and hearing how you're observing, right? If nature, if birds were the same as when you are working with a quartet of dancers.
Oh, yeah.
But instead of it being in the studio, it's taking your creative practice and looking at the larger world around you.
Yeah, I feel really lucky. I realized that I've been able to stay in dance for my entire adult life. And if it wasn't dance, it was opera. And within opera, I was doing movement dramaturgy and movement direction and choreography. So it was still very dance related. And I've taught dance, I get to direct and choreograph. And, but there's all these like ups and downs. Like in college, all I wanted to do was, everyone's like, oh, what do you want to do after college? And I was like, I want to dance every day for like 8 hours a day, just like we do in college.
And then you did.
Yeah, but the first thing the professor's like, well, that doesn't really happen. You got to pay your dues, and there's only a few jobs out there, so it's really hard to do that. And I was like, okay, heard. But then I was able to do it. And then you do it for so long that you're like, I'm sore. My ankle hurts a lot. My back's starting to hurt. I had 2 kids. I'm like, what am I doing? And then you kind of get bored. And then you're like, well, if this is all dancing is, which sounds crazy because it was such a blessing, right? We got to tour everywhere. It was such a magic. Like, we went to Asia on a State Department tour. We spent a month in Iowa. We went to France, went to Switzerland. We went to all these different places, and it was such a blessing. But at some point I was like, I am bored. And then that's not great for the art. That's not great for.
Right. There's the physical body, but then also your sort of spirit.
Soul body.
Yeah.
And then I realized my spirit body was like, what's dance about? Like, why are you doing this? What is dancing? And so I thought maybe I hated dance for a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I realized, sitting with Gerald Cassell's community engagement project through Bridge Live Arts, that it was Gerald, Raisa Simpson, David Herrera, Samay Dizion, and Bhumi Patel. And we...
great company.
Amazing. Somehow I got invited to... And I remember like sitting with them, and the first time I cried. And I was like, wow, why am I crying? And I think I realized it wasn't dance that I was angry with. It was everything else. It was the way dance had to operate, actually. Because I don't think dance is meant to operate within capitalism, but it's forced to. And then, so that was really healing. And it was really based in how do we analyze the production, creation, and funding of dance in the Bay Area? And then with that analysis, it's like, oh, yeah, of course, like people are racist and not intentionally, but those metrics actually
it's embedded
play out.
in systems.
It's in our systems. And so what do we do about it?
Is this before or after or simultaneously when you worked with Access Dance?
This is after.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked with Access Dance Company from 2015, 2016, maybe half of 2017. Yeah. And that was also a very life-enhancing, changing moment. There's something about professionalism in dance that people love to debate. What is professional dance? And I had some people come up to me and they're like, well, Access isn't really a professional dance company, isn't it? And I was like,
what
are you talking about? Like, that's insane. These artists are just mind-blowingly talented, and they train so hard.
As a physically integrated company.
Yeah, with disabled and non-disabled dancers. And so that really taught me a lot about aesthetic bias, and it's so learned. People learn how to see and how to evaluate. And I think there's something about the ocularity of like information and like how we judge it, like and how we're conditioned through all of that is actually it's actually something I think about right now as I'm starting my PhD studies. Yeah, and that's actually something that Chris and I kind of talked about at the very beginning of our jam when we first met.
Well, also as a jazz artist and practitioner working inside of a predominantly white-lit institution like a university, I'm sure a lot of what you discovered around aesthetic bias and professionalism, rears and manifests in different ways, unintentionally so.
Oh, absolutely,
but not without the also unintended consequences. I'm curious because one of the sort of ongoing themes of a lot of the conversations with Inside the Dancer Studio is this ever moving target for what our success or our goals are, and it sounds like you have found ways to have a life in dance because you're open to shifting what your goals are. It isn't about dancing for 8 hours a day anymore.
No.
It might, and I would even say getting to witness what you've done with your own company, Kambara Plus, it isn't always about how do I, perform a home season and have a tour season. And you have a much more expansive approach to embracing technology as part of the creative process. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about those things as navigating the sort of shifting idea of like, well, what is 21st century dance? And what is virtuosity in dance today?
Yeah, what 21st century dance? I think we're figuring it out. So I'll just say that the reason why I got interested in technology was because of the pandemic. And we were all, I was teaching for San Francisco's Ruth Ozawa School for the Arts at the time. And we spent 18 months online. So I was teaching on Zoom for a year and a half, which...
For a school for the arts, right? Like in English class, any of our gen ed, also not ideal. But for classes when you can't be in the room moving together. Yeah.
That was really disturbing. And, even the basic things, we can't go onto the floor because you're off camera.
Right.
Yeah, you can't do that. And it's like, how do you make your music sound better? Or how do you, and there's all these things to navigate. And then at the same time, me and my family, we were like watching the Marvel movies in chronological order. And I had a 7th grader and she was like, oh, can I watch Euphoria? And I was like, wait, we just went from Harry Potter. Like, how are we going to Euphoria so fast? And so there's just a lot of questions I had. And then I realized, we need to be able to do more together online, which I didn't really want to do, but I felt like that was somehow important just in case we had to do it for a really, really long time.
I mean, when you think about, even before TV, before radio, that was the purpose of the town hall in village squares and how our places were designed and laid out. And then the idea of radio, families crowding around, that was the town hall and space. And then we had 3 TV stations. And
right.
So in some ways with the technological advances, how we can be virtually or physically in space together has been being challenged for a long time.
And it has been. And there's, this whole thing of like, I'm just going to go to my room and watch this thing. And it's like, well, that's not great, actually, because then we're not together watching it. It might be scary or you might have questions and we're not processing it in real time. And so I ended up going on this, taking a group of artists and collaborators on a field trip during the pandemic. We had some extra money because we weren't forced to produce, and funders were generous enough to say, okay, well, you can use these funds for whatever you need. So we took a couple $1,000s and went on a virtual reality field trip with Kraus Industries, Kraus Technologies. And what it was is each of us, there's a group of us, maybe 10 people with VR headsets. They would mail them out, and then we would have 45 minutes on Zoom and 45 minutes in VR, and then we'd have a bunch of homework to do, which was fascinating.
Yeah, homework after the experience to be ready for the experience.
Yes, both. So we would have homework so we can like talk about it the next day. What did we enjoy? And so we explored not just VR but AR. We had some, apps. We had some laptop interfacing designs, and we're talking about what kinds of interactions felt interesting to us. Some of them made us nauseous. Some of them were really scary. Like, I had to play the single shooter game called Super Hot, and I was like shivering, and my kids were like, "What's wrong?" And then that was another thing. My kids were like, "That's actually a really interesting movement you're doing." So there was that, but the interaction felt right. And so when we were commissioned by Georgia Tech for Center for the Arts to create a XR extended reality project on my choreographic research for my Hewlett project, which is called Ikai Means Once, a Transplanted Pilgrimage, I was able to think about how can pilgrimage be reached through technology? And it could be very basic technology, like origami, like paper folding technology is one way. We also built a hologram. That's probably like our most technology, like fancy one. And then the hologram I realized was really important to me because teaching on Zoom, I was like, oh, this is really hard. If something's in 3D, is it easier to learn as a dance? And so we took a Obon dance by Nobuko Miyamoto and made it into a hologram. And so people visiting the hologram could dance together. And then we also made a video game about packing and unpacking because that was the choreographic constant for the process, for the project, for the live performance piece. And it was packing a suitcase with actual Japanese American families' belongings. And depending on what you packed, you were able to keep cultural memories. And that was a really interesting research project.
Oh, yeah. I'm struck. One of the things that we often talk about with other artists is like what they look for in collaborators or dancers. Given your rich history exploring and embracing technology, how do you find great technical collaborators? How do you find, what do you look for in a technologist? Because it's not like you're also coding these things.
No, I'm not coding these things. Actually just had my first coding experience in a graduate level music class, which is called Max. And it's an algorithmic music maker. So if you think about like Brian Eno and how he makes some of those sounds, it's kind of like using math to make that kind of music.
Okay.
Which is fun. But it's not line coding. It's more like block coding. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, like, how do you ever find friendships and partnerships and collaborations? Sometimes they work, sometimes they stop working. Sometimes people get busy.
Yeah. But it's something that to talk about, whether it's professionalism, I'll sort of set that word aside that, when you are thinking and casting a dance or an opera, right, you need people who have a certain kind of training and or quality, performative quality.
Yes.
And so there is a similar sort of expertise that I find is necessary with other collaborators and perhaps especially with technology. And yet it's such a burgeoning field,
Yes.
right? And fast changing.
Yes.
So
right.
how I'm
Yes.
curious if you might reflect if you worked with different technologists or some of the same ones for these different projects.
Yeah, so we worked with Georgia Tech was really great in the sense that they made a bunch of technology connections for us. So we worked with design students who created a poetry box like Zoltar, but of Janice Merikitani, who's a Japanese-American poet in San Francisco, a poet laureate who writes about her incarceration experience as a child. And so they designed a prototype, and then we actually had it built out professionally. And that was an amazing experience. And then we met a house dancer in Atlanta who's also a game designer. And so he was able to make our suitcase packing game. And then owner Topol, who's one of our producers, introduced me to John Crawford at UC Irvine, who was like, oh yeah, we could make that movement motion mapping thing pretty easily. And so we worked with him. And then, because I live in San Francisco, one of my neighbors is like, oh, you just need a really good volumetric capture to make your hologram. I was like, oh, okay.
Great.
And then I was at a Christmas party. I know. I was like, what's volumetric capture? So then I was like at a Christmas party at my other neighbor's house. And then the neighbors from like not my street, but the street across from us came, and then they were like, oh yeah, I work for Microsoft Studios. Why don't I help you connect with somebody there? Then we can see what we can do. And so I ended up meeting this guy, and he's great. And then 3 days later, San Francisco closed that studio. But then they were able to introduce me to somebody in Los Angeles who picked up the project. So yes, I think technical skill is one thing, but who's excited? And of course, you have to figure out how do we pay people and how many grants can we get and all that kind of stuff. But the other thing is who's actually really excited about this? And what I mean by this is who's excited about using technology in a way that's not supposed to be used. Right. So motion capture, what we know of it is or what I know of it is more like Ring doorbells. Right. And, what does that capture and who is that even filled with any kind of consent?
Right.
Or people who's, next door who are like, look at these porch pirates. And it's that's kind of creepy. And so how are people interested in using these kind of ubiquitous technologies and making them so they don't work for capitalism? That's how I like to think about it. And so that's what I'm interested in. And if people are interested in that.
Yeah.
And if, as one of my favorite dancers, Leisha Zieber says, as long as they have good vibes. Right. And what that means, I realize, is that we're both able to understand what feedback means and not have super hard lines. We have really nice shapes, shapes of ideas, shapes of goals, maybe one overarching shape, but within that shape, we have multiple shapes. Yeah.
There's something, as you describe it too, that it also feels hearkening back to your experience inside of a devised dance making company. Yeah. But not everyone's a dancer. They might be contributing different things, but the spirit of being willing to be in the room with people, whether you're parenting or how you navigate the world and even showing up to talk to people. Otherwise, I love hearing about the blending. That was not a lot of my experience in San Francisco. It felt like our communities were not overlapping enough, and they should be, because on paper, right, on the map, based on how we were organized, you would think, and yet our behaviors and habits, both in the fields and what we had learned, were somehow not creating enough overlap. But it sounds like you've found a way to also navigate the zigs and zags of a creative career, that you're able to sort of practice putting out what you're interested in and hearing from people so that you can continue a relationship with them.
Yeah, I realized that one of the things I'm really interested in is points of contact. So, before I was an ODC dance company member, I danced for a bunch of different, independent choreographers in the Bay Area.
Do that freelance life.
Oh, yeah. And, they'd be like, oh, do you want to do some aerial work? And I'd be like, okay, sure. Why not? Like, let's try some line, rope and harness work, or, let's try contact improv. And, I'm so lucky that there's so many amazing choreographers in the Bay. And, one of my first experiences was with Jesalito BA and Steamroller Dance Company, which is primarily an Asian American dance company. And we love to do partnering and all that kind of stuff. And I realized I'm really interested in points of contact. And so, like, even when I look at this interesting painting in front of me, I'm like, oh, look at how those lines are touching other colors. And that's what I notice versus the leaves, let's say, or the center diamond. So I realized that there's something about how do we touch other communities. And maybe it's because I was part of the more independent kind of punk dance community in San Francisco in the early 2000s before joining ODC, that I always felt like, even some people say in the dance community, oh, everyone's kind of fragmented. I actually felt like I didn't only know ODC dancers. I knew dancers outside of ODC and choreographers outside of ODC, and that was a really different set of skills, actually. And so I think about that when people are like, oh, you're really good at networking. And I'm like, actually, I'm just interested in contact points. Like, how is your research touching my research? And how might that actually help me understand the shape of my research even more?
Right.
Because, like, I'm only getting to, like, feel the edges of it. But somehow with other collaborations, I can feel the entire shape, even if I don't have an answer.
The contact points, or also not looking for just a single answer.
Correct.
Because I think partially because dance, is being forced to work inside of capitalism, that it can be artists say, I need a dramaturg. I need a person who does XR. I need, which is a very different inquiry than being open and listening and looking for points of contact. And you have, of course, ideas of what you might be looking for, but you aren't limiting yourself to that one thing as if it's a zero-sum game.
Right. And I think that's the difference with 21st century dance, is we're no longer saying there is this universal audience, right? My points of contact, some of them are unintentional. They just happen, right? Because of circumstance. But even within those, it's like, how do you shape that contact, or how do you press on it, or actually step away from it? And so that's different. Like, at least the dancers I know, and this also gets really tricky. Like, who's your dance for? Well, it might be for some people, sure, but hopefully other people will also come and maybe like it or not like it, whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. It's like, it's also, is it only for people that are alive right now? Like, can it be for people that are not alive yet or were alive? So things like that I'm interested in. And yeah.
I love that. I have one last question. Sure. And I feel that you also already brought in, a whole new perspective. And I've gotten to do a lot of these interviews, and they're never the same.
Cool.
But we also like to invite, if, with the many different points of contact and history that you've had, if there was a particular piece of advice that you received from a mentor or someone in your training that you would like to uplift and pass along, but you also have the option of offering your own piece of advice for future artists.
I think my advice is that we tend to remember the negative. So as dancers, particularly if you have some sort of like conservatory training, or, you're doing a lot of performing on, or some sort of performance-based or discipline-based project, there's a lot of remembering the correction and almost taking it like oh wow, they care about me and they pay so much attention to me. I must be doing something right. But in remembering that discipline or that correction, I think there's also memorizing of fault. And
deficit thinking.
A deficit. And actually dancing is the opposite. So try to remember how you feel you did well versus what other people think you are doing. Because I think that embodiment piece is critical, actually. And as technology grows, we're losing it, actually.
Inside the Dancers Studio Conversation Series is produced by NCCAkron and supported in part by Audio-Technica, a global audio manufacturer with U.S. headquarters in Northeast Ohio. Our podcast program is produced by Lisa Niedermeyer of Handmade Future Studio. Rahsaan Cruz is our audio engineer, with transcription by Arushi Singh, theme music by Flaco Torres, and cover art by Micah Kraus. Special thanks to Laura Alicott, Nikisha Moore-Dunson, Dante Fields, Jen Garlando, and Mary Claire Hulbert. To learn more about NCCAkron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCCAkron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for Inside the Dancers Studio. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.